The first bill up for public hearing is Substitute House Bill 1177. We're going to start with staff briefing.
Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Cold Case Investigations Unit, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Task Force, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People, Missing or Murdered Indigenous Women or Persons Cold cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and people.
I would like to welcome the prime sponsor to the Law and Justice Committee. Please do come and tell us about your bill.
I'm Representative Deborah Lacanoff out of the 40th Legislative District, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's and People's Task Force. With missing and murdered Indigenous women, our women are being beaten, raped, and taken. There are over 1,000 cold cases within the Attorney General's office. Over 400 plus are Native Americans. Over 114 are Native American women. The victimization and the murder of women who look like me, sound like my daughters, my aunties, and my grandmothers. The first people of Washington State, the first people of this nation, are valuable and every life matters.
Creating a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Cold Case Investigation Unit, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, 5,712 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. On a national level, murder is the third leading cause of death among American Indian, Alaska Native women and girls aged 10 to 24.
There are never any answers to give when your granddaughter asks where her mommy is every night.
Public officials in our institutions have long ignored the struggles of Indigenous women.
More than half of murdered Indigenous people in Washington state are boys and men. The MMIWP Task Force released a report last year in which it committed to understanding and addressing violence experienced by all American Indian and Alaska Native people, regardless of their gender. The report acknowledged that, quote, much of the media coverage and public messaging still focuses on the violence experienced by women and girls. Our exclusion of men in the public messaging around this issue is being perpetuated, both in the text of this bill and in every public testimony on it so far. No one is saying the word men. I saw a recent TV news report in which an Indigenous woman said, "Our men are missing and murdered too, and it seems like they keep being left out of the conversation." The speaker was Maylin Foster, the mother of Derek Wiley, who was murdered in 2020. With Maylin's permission, I tell you that Derek is one of the reasons I feel strongly that in Washington, the time has come for us to use the language missing and murdered Indigenous people, as is common elsewhere. Missing and murdered women and people is an odd language construction, and I don't see it as sustainable in an environment of gender inclusivity. I am not an Indigenous person myself. I don't have to be to assert my belief that every person is equally deserving of governmental protection from harm, regardless of their sex and gender. Again, more than half of the murdered are boys and men. I ask you, please make the text of this bill and the discussion around this issue fully gender inclusive.